People started to settle in the Nile Valley in circa 5000 BCE. However, most historians agree that Egypt didn't become a united country until circa 3100 BCE. At this time, Upper and Lower Egypt were united, possibly by King Narmer. This is the time when hieroglyphics first began to be used to write things down. As most of Egypt is desert, people settled near the River Nile. Most Egyptians were farmers and their lives were based around the seasons. In ancient Egypt, there were 3 seasons: the flooding season, Akhet, the growing season, Peret, and the harvesting season, Shemu. During the flooding season, the River Nile would burst its banks and flood the surrounding land. This was very important for the farmers as it left behind lots of mud which made the soil very fertile. Farmers would have other jobs during this time, such as building temples, as they could not farm. The growing season was when the farmers returned to plant seeds in the soil. It usually took place between October and February. Finally, the harvesting season was when the farmers would collect in their crops. They needed to do this before the flood season returned. The history of ancient Egypt is usually divided into 3 kingdoms: the Old, Middle and New Kingdoms. The gaps in between are known as intermediate periods. The Old Kingdom started under King Djoser in circa 2682 BCE. During the Old Kingdom, lots of building took place because it was a period of relative peace and prosperity. One of Djoser's architects, Imhotep, built the step pyramid at Saqqara, and sometime in the 26th century BCE, construction on the pyramids at Giza took place. Towards the end of the Old Kingdom, famine and weak leaders led to many civil wars. The Middle Kingdom began when Mentuhotep II reunited Egypt in circa 2055 BCE. During this period, Egypt became powerful again, and its armies reconquered Nubia to the south, and Sinai to the northeast. Trading made the country extremely wealthy during this time. The New Kingdom started in circa 1550 BCE. During this time, it was at its greatest and conquered many of its neighbors. Pharaohs stopped being placed in pyramids and started to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. This time period is when pharaohs such as Hatshepsut, Tutankhamun and Ramesses II lived. After these kingdoms, Egypt started to become weaker, and was often invaded by outsiders such as the Persians and the Greeks. Eventually, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire around 30 BCE, with Cleopatra VII being the last Egyptian pharaoh. After Egypt was united, a form of writing started to be used in Egypt to keep records. The first type of writing in ancient Egypt used hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs are a form of writing that uses pictures to represent letters, sounds and even entire words. They were usually drawn on papyrus, or carved, painted on the walls of buildings such as temples or tombs. There were approximately 800 different hieroglyphs. Due to hieroglyphs taking a long time to write, carve, the ancient Egyptians had to come up with other forms of writing for everyday use. The other 3 main forms of ancient Egyptian writing were hieratic, demotic and Coptic. Hieratic was a simpler form of hieroglyphs, that could be written quickly and in cursive. It was mostly used by priests to keep records. Important information could then be later written in hieroglyphics if needed. Demotic was also a simpler form of hieroglyphs that was used for everyday writing. It was used for business and writing literature. The final type of ancient Egyptian writing was Coptic. This was not a hieroglyphic language, but had an alphabet. It was made up of letters based on the Greek alphabet, mixed with some demotic symbols. On the next slide, you will see a picture showing how the language changed over time, from hieroglyphs to Coptic. This took place over several thousand years. Egyptian writing stopped being used after the Romans took over ancient Egypt. This meant that for at least 1,500 years, no one was able to understand it. In 1799, part of a stone stela was discovered by the French near the town of Rosetta in Egypt, during Napoleon's invasion of Egypt. It has 3 inscriptions on it, all saying the same thing: a decree issued by the pharaoh Ptolemy V, in 196 BCE. The inscriptions were written in hieroglyphs, Demotic and Ancient Greek. As Ancient Greek was known to historians, many of them worked on trying to translate the Demotic and hieroglyphic texts. Most of it was translated by two scholars, Thomas Young and Jean-François Champollion, over a period of 23 years.